again, I think if we're going to force Americans to make these radical changes, they're not going to go along. You throw your hands up, but you haven't. Whoa, I can do it. But you haven't implemented the plans. Us governors and mayors are the ones that we have to pick up all the pieces.
As many thought would happen, the Democratic presidential primary field is beginning to whittle down in the wake of increasing qualifications for the next round of debates, the first of which being former governor of Colorado, John Hickenlooper. Hello everybody, it is a beautiful day here in America. Welcome back to the campaign trail. My name is Jared, and today we're going to be talking about Governor Hickenlooper's withdrawal from the Democratic presidential primary and what it means for the primary as a whole. I'll do a basic recap of his campaign, go over some of the signs that showed his campaign was struggling, who he might endorse, and lastly, where does he go from here? So let's get started with a very basic overview of Hickenlooper's campaign. It started on March 7th, 2019 and ended August 15th of the same year. Before running for president, Hickenlooper was the governor of Colorado for 8 years, and before that, he was the mayor of Denver for 8 years. The slogan he chose for his campaign was "Stand Tall." While he ran, he called himself a pragmatic progressive who sought practical changes in policy rather than making big promises he had no idea if he could keep. Throughout his campaign, the highest he polled was 2% and the lowest he polled was 0%. Now, what were some of the signs that his campaign was struggling? Well, firstly, you could tell from the beginning that there was a lack of excitement for his campaign, and as a result, he had trouble gaining traction in the polls or fundraising. His fundraising especially was abysmal. He raised only $836,000 in the second quarter. Meanwhile, upper-tier candidates were raising in the double-digit millions. Another sign that his campaign was struggling was the trouble Hickenlooper had with his campaign staff. At one point, Hickenlooper had to replace most of his top aides, and it was rumored that these aides were pressuring him to drop out of the race. Another thing that made Hickenlooper struggle was the crowded moderate lane in the primary. Most of the moderate candidates were already struggling to siphon support from Joe Biden, and Hickenlooper was doing the worst out of them. And then add in the fact that he had the least inspiring performance of the moderates during the second debate, and you can see why he was failing to gain traction. The last reason is the one I think ultimately caused him to decide to drop out, and that was him facing pressure from the Democratic Party officials to drop out so that he could consider a run for U.S. Senate in Colorado. I'll come back to this in a second, but let's talk about who I think Hickenlooper will ultimately endorse. There are actually quite a few candidates who I could see Hickenlooper endorsing, but I'll give you guys my top three. First, I have fellow Coloradan Senator Michael Bennet. Bennet and Hickenlooper know each other well on a personal level and have a great working relationship. Bennet shares many of Hickenlooper's ideas, especially his more moderate approach to politics. I think this endorsement would be more likely if Bennet was set to make the next round of debates, but since that isn't the case, I do think Hickenlooper goes for another candidacy that seems to have some stronger legs. One of which would be Senator from Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar. In terms of fundraising and polling, Klobuchar seems poised to benefit the most as a moderate candidate should Biden falter. Like the other two here, Klobuchar matches Hickenlooper's approach and attitude towards policies and politics in general. If Hickenlooper wanted to shake some things up in the primary, he could make some noise by trying to consolidate moderate support around a different candidate than Joe Biden, and I don't think Klobuchar herself would mind the headlines whatsoever. The last candidate who I think Hickenlooper could endorse is the one he would endorse if he was looking to consolidate support around the frontrunner, and that is, of course, former Vice President Joe Biden. I think this is a scenario most likely to happen, as Hickenlooper doesn't strike me as the guy who would want to split the moderate vote, especially if it means in his eyes, socialist candidate would benefit. So I think he takes a safe route and endorses Biden to help create a narrative that the party can unify around Biden. Now, where does Hickenlooper go from here? I think the main next step for him is pretty obvious, and that is to run for Colorado's 2020 Senate seat. While Hickenlooper has expressed discontent at the idea of running for Senate, he seems to be changing his tune about it, even specifically mentioning it in his video where he announced his withdrawal from the primary. He hasn't committed to running yet, but there are several reasons why he should run. First up, the Senate map in 2020 is very favorable to Republicans, so the Democrats need as many toss-up races as they can find. Cory Gardner, the current senator from Colorado, is considered to be one of the most at-risk seats for Republicans in 2020. Given that Hickenlooper was a more popular governor than Gardner is a senator, it makes sense as to why Democrats see Hickenlooper as a good opponent for 2020. Lastly, Hickenlooper can help put an end to a crowded Democratic primary for the nomination to take on Cory Gardner. Currently, there are 6 major candidates running in that primary, and there is no clear frontrunner. If Hickenlooper were to jump in, polls indicate that he would be an immediate frontrunner, helping end what could be an otherwise long, drawn-out, and ugly primary. The Democratic Party does not want this, as candidates who face incumbents after a long, hard-fought primaries have an abysmal winning record, so the party would rather consolidate around Hickenlooper and go from there. Another option I did want to throw up here is the idea that someone could choose Hickenlooper as their vice presidential candidate, especially if the goal was for the VP to be a quieter, more moderate candidate who balanced out a more progressive candidate. Do I think this is likely to happen? Not really, but it is something to keep in mind. So that is it. Hickenlooper becomes the second major candidate to drop out of the primary. I'm not one to say, like many other people, that he should never have ran in the first place, but I can never deny that he had a huge uphill climb if he wanted to win the nomination. Ultimately, he didn't come close to it, and we'll have to see what his next move is. So what do you guys think? Was Hickenlooper right to drop out? What do you think his next move will be? Are there any positions I didn't mention that you think he'd be good for? Who will he endorse? Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Remember, if you like what you see and hear, make sure you click that like button and subscribe to the channel. With all that being said, my name is Jared, and I'll see you guys next time on the campaign trail.